How many folks are a business? Okay. So it's a good mix. So we will hopefully have a discussion that kind of touches on all three of those disciplines. Let me start by just giving you a quick introduction of CPS Energy. Like Varun said, we are the largest municipally owned gas and electric utility in the country. We're roughly about twice the size of Austin Energy, just to maybe proxy it here for the hometown here. We're also vertically integrated. We have generation capacity. We have transmission distribution. We serve the retail customer in the greater San Antonio area. We both serve electricity power needs of our customers as well as natural gas to the home or business. We've got about 750,000 electrical customers, 334,000 natural gas customers. We spread over roughly about a 1,500 square mile service area, about $2.4 billion in revenue, $10.5 billion in total assets, and approximately 3,300 employees. So we're a sizable company, and we do have the ability to kind of have an impact both regionally and we believe nationally on some of these issues that are confronting the utility business. And I'd like to also say, the utility business is an interesting time. It's almost like the telecom period in the 90s where there was a lot of disruption and transformation. Same things happening utility. The old days, you built power plants, you flowed power one direction around power lines, and you served the customers and you gave them a bill once a month. Well, that technology's turning that upside down, whether it's distributed generation, new technologies in terms of demand response and LED lighting, new energy efficiency products. So there's just a lot of exciting things that are coming to the utility sector, and it allows people to innovate, and it allows people to grow and be successful, but it also will leave some folks behind. So we think of our strategy in that context. Start by saying, talking about our long-term vision. We got something called Vision 2020, which basically articulates where we want to be by the year 2020. There are two primary goals there. 20% of our generation capacity is coming from renewables, and 65% of our generation will be low carbon. So those are the two primary goals that we're driving towards. But more broadly speaking, what we are doing is we're trying to diversify our generation mix because there are risks and opportunities with each fuel type, including renewables. And so we've gone from about 5 years ago, and I'll show you a chart on this, but 5 years ago, roughly 80% of the power serving the greater San Antonio area was coming from coal and nuclear. And we've now diversified that into a much more balanced picture. Again, I'll show you that. We also have a very comprehensive energy efficiency program of 771 megawatts. So instead of having to build a power plant, we are basically rebating our customers dollars for them to reduce consumption and basically create a virtual power plant. And then on top of that, we have the 1,500 megawatts of renewables goals that we have in place. So we're trying to do this in a way that keeps things affordable and moves us towards a low carbon footprint. The former EPA administrator, Lisa Jackson, was in San Antonio roughly about a year ago, and she really called out San Antonio and the utility for really charting a path in this way. So you can see the picture here on the left was our 2010 generation portfolio. So you can see that a majority of that, 46% was coal, 31% was or 32% was nuclear. So approaching 80% coming from those two resources. We had very little natural gas in our mix, less than 7%. And we had kind of a blend of energy efficiency and renewables. And where we project to be, and in fact, we're pretty close to there today because of our execution on our strategy, is we've grown the natural gas slice from 7% to close to 20%. We've committed to shut down two aging coal plants, the Dealey coal units, by 2018. and have bought the Rio Nogales, it's a 3-on-1 combined cycle natural gas plant that's in Seguin, Texas. So if you ever take I-10 towards Houston, it's a plant right off I-10 that you see there close to San Antonio. And that really is the primary backup to the coal units. There's an interesting story around the coal units because roughly 4 or 5 years ago, the company was committed to to continue investing in those plants by putting scrubbers on them, which basically controls sulfur dioxide emissions. And that was roughly about a $500 million investment. And especially under the leadership of our new CEO, he's not so new now, but 3.5 years ago he came on board, Doyle Beneby, who I work for. He really challenged that, and even though the economics, the business case for that one particular retrofit could be made, we looked at it from a life cycle of investment in that coal plant. So yeah, you're now investing in this emission control to control SOx, but then what about mercury control, which was coming down the pike next, water issues, carbon issues. And so if you looked at all of that, the business case then transformed from a single retrofit to a lifetime of retrofits and uncertainty around carbon, that it really showed that it made more sense to retire those units, even though they were in the money, so to speak. And so with that, we retired the coal units and basically brought on natural gas, and that's really the increase in that slice of the pie. Likewise, coal is going from 46% to 34% because primarily the shutting down of the 2 Dealey coal units. Nuclear stays the same, so we're not adding nuclear capacity. We own 40% of the South Texas project. NRG and Austin Energy are the other co-owners of that facility, and those are 2 units down there, and I think we're roughly about 1,080 megawatts of power capacity coming from that. And since it's not growing, its share of the pie is actually decreasing to 23% because our overall generation mix and our overall load continues to grow. And then we continue to add energy efficiency. I talked a little bit about 771 megawatts of the STEP program, which is Save for Tomorrow's energy plan. 12% wind, 2% solar, and then 0.24% landfill gas. And we've been very aggressive adding both wind and solar to our portfolio. We're the #1 wind off-taker in the state of Texas. We have West Texas wind under contract. We also have Gulf Coast wind. So if you drive up towards Sweetwater, you'll see a lot of our wind farms. You drive down to Corpus on I-37, you'll see in the distance some of the wind farms we have there. The West Texas wind blows a lot better at night, and the Gulf Coast wind has a much better afternoon profile, which coincides with load more closely. We also are the largest solar utility in the state of Texas. We have about 100 megawatts of solar that's deployed in the ground, and that's both utility scale solar as well as rooftop. We've also, a couple years ago, really made a landmark deal where we basically put all of our solar capacity goals on the table to create a 400 megawatt solar deal where the partner would bring economic development, jobs, and basically build the balance of systems and the solar panels and the tracking systems in San Antonio, committing to, in this case, stand up about 800 jobs, about $100 million of capital investment to basically provide those solar farms. And we are probably about 80, 90 megawatts into that deal. But that deal should be done by 2016. So by 2016, we'll have over 450 megawatts of solar in the ground. We have about 17 megawatts of rooftop solar, so that is growing very quickly. We provide a very robust rebate. In fact, we've run out of we basically are close to running out of the allocated budget dollars for that rebate program that has basically been budgeted through 2020. So we're really working with the community to figure out how to continue to invest in that resource. And feel free to ask any questions if anyone has any. We can go ahead.
Is there a reason you're not adding more nuclear?
Yeah. About 3-4 years ago, there was a look at expanding that STP site to add 2 more reactors there. The challenge with nuclear is really no one really knows what the price tag. It's a lot of upfront costs, and then once you built it, the variable cost of running it, the fuel cost is actually pretty reasonable, but the upfront cost with all the safety issues and especially given what happened in Japan with Fukushima, really has put a lot of uncertainty into what's the price tag for nuclear. So just as an example, we have put, we were, again, several years ago, looking to add, along in partnership with NRG, 2 more reactors at STP. And we had invested roughly about $400 million, as part of the planning process and getting it, started. And no dirt had even been moved. So, $400 million that, we still haven't as an investment for STP 3 and 4 shows you kind of the uncertainty of how to move forward there. We were in dispute with NRG on that. We settled with them, and basically we have 7.6% of whatever gets built there. And it's not clear whether anything will get built because of the uncertainty, both in price, the regulations post Fukushima, and quite frankly, natural gas. Natural gas has come down so much that it really stresses the economics of nuclear. So, if gas prices were where they were pre-shale, I think people would take on that uncertainty. But if you're talking about spending 10, 12, 13 billion dollars on a nuclear plant when you can build a gas plant for a billion, a couple billion, that's a pretty big challenge for some folks.
What do you do with those 2 coal refineries?
We're looking at potentially repurposing them to run natural gas. You could make them, instead of burning coal, you could burn natural gas. The problem with that is it's a very inefficient process. Natural gas has moved to what's called combined cycle natural gas plants, which have lower heat rates, so where you're basically recapturing some of the heat and making electricity with that. So if you did that and created a combined cycle at that facility, it would take a lot more effort, and you might as well probably just start a fresh start on a clean site. But we are looking at options, everything from just completely shutting it down to repowering it with gas. We've even looked at biomass, even though we don't really think that's a viable option right now.
How did you determine the 2020 generation peaks?
Yeah, I think part of it was just we wanted more balance, in our portfolio. So. More balance and more emphasis on natural gas given what has happened on post-shale. And so part of it was looking at, with power plants, you don't acquire them in small increments. You add 800 megawatts. And so, part of it was modeling, if we added another natural gas plant, if we retired this plant in coal, if we added, so much on energy efficiency, this is how the mix was. So it was more looking at a scenario where you add capacity and with a fuel source and you take capacity away, and it happened to play out like this page here. But we did not have a precise model saying that natural gas will be 19.57%. That was really a result of adding 800 megawatts to that number right there.
In absolute numbers, like if we just talk nuclear, how much is there 2010? How much is there 2020?
So in terms of megawatts, it's the same. So it's I think it's 1080 for us in 2010 and in 2020. So about 1,000 megawatts for nuclear.
And coal?
Coal is let me see. I think it's about 2,000 in 2010 and roughly about 1,200 in 2020. Yeah, that's a good point. We don't reprocess our nuclear fuel once it's initially used. So in France they reprocess it. So I don't remember the exact numbers, but we use actually a very small portion of the energy potential of our nuclear fuel because we don't reprocess it. And the reason we don't reprocess it is, there's sort of a national policy that, if you reprocess it, it potentially could get to weapons grade, and there's sort of broader national security issues around that. But what's interesting is, it is being stored on site, and so at some point in the future, when we think we have, some of the controls, from a security standpoint, there's that opportunity to go back to that, maybe in 30, 40 years, reprocess it and get more energy out of it using the same infrastructure that you've got. So it's not an option today, but it potentially could be an option down the road.
So these creations were made recently or 2010?
This is 2012 is when we made these predictions.
So you actualize these projections like regularly, or is something that, okay, we 2012 we say this and we're working to that with that goal for change?
Yeah. So again, since we add capacity in big chunks, it really is more a static picture than every year it changes. The other thing is our load in San Antonio and Texas, across Texas in general, is very stable. So we can tell you, our load's going to grow 1.5% to 2% a year. We can offset that with energy efficiency. So we're in a very stable load, forward load environment. We're very stable from a generation capacity. So we're not really changing this picture much. I think where a lot of the change could happen is really this slice here, which is the energy efficiency and renewables. As new technology, solar's gotten a lot less expensive, and so there's now the ability to add solar in a much more economic way. You can add solar in increments. You don't have to add solar in 500 megawatt blocks. Likewise with wind and energy efficiency. So I think if anything changes here, it's going to be these slices here. These are going to remain pretty static.
How is CPS responding to the
Yeah, we're excited about your goal here. I think it's for me, and I've been a strategy guy for a long time now. It's easy to put broad-based goals out there at 2030. That's a long time from now. It's nice to see that kind of aspiration, but I think what will be more interesting is what's the game plan to get there, and what are some of the specifics, and really how do you do it in a way that you keep things affordable for our communities, and how do you do it in a way that power stays reliable in the community and the network. So.
I find it surprising that the share of wind has increased considering the uncertainty, regarding credits and everything. What was your logic behind that? And
Share of
increase in solar being less?
Yeah, well, solar is going up, 0.03 to 2.11. So with wind, wind also has a lot more opportunity to scale. So a wind farm will be 200 megawatts. If you build a wind farm, or 100 megawatts. So whereas solar, 100 megawatts is a lot of solar, a lot of panel. Each panel is 300 watts. Just to kind of give you so you need a lot of footprint, a lot of panels to kind of get to those kind of sizes and scale. So wind is a lot more easy, or historically has been a lot easier to scale, and so we have added a lot of capacity on wind, and that's why that number has gone up. And but I would say we are pretty much done with adding wind, and we really think where we're going to be adding is more on solar. So wind really came early, and solar now is kind of the game to play in terms of new opportunities on the renewable front.
So, is there a future for solar thermal as well, or?
Everything has its potential and opportunity. I'm not a huge fan of solar thermal. It has not seen the same cost curve as PV solar has. For a variety of reasons. The other thing about solar thermal is it's big infrastructure. You have to set up a big central plant. It doesn't have the same distributed fashion. So even in our case, we might have 40 megawatt solar farms, but they're within the fabric of our distribution system. They're within the fabric of San Antonio. So you drive by a highway, and I'll show you a picture, you'll see a field of solar panels, or there'll be solar panels next to a school. And so you don't have that same potential with solar thermal. I mean, solar thermal, basically you're heating water to create steam to turn a turbine. It's very similar to, burning a fossil fuel and heating water and turning a turbine. You're just using sunlight. Say it again.
I think it's not easy to increase those regional parameters market if your government don't support it.
Yeah, that's a interesting point. Again, I was on the staff of Bill White's before I came over to CPS, and I think what's interesting, and I was in private sector before that, so I've kind of seen a lot. Here in this country, the government is by the people, and so there is such interest in renewables and solar by the people out there that I think those kind of policies are going to be hard for the government to say, I'm going to go 180 degrees, I'm going to stop, incenting these kind of technologies. We've even seen that in our community as we've pushed for various tariffs and rates, that are, looking to recover the costs of solar, for example. We've had quite a bit of pushback, to say, hey, we don't want that. We actually want more solar, even though it's costing the community maybe a little bit more for that. So we've seen a very much a halo around solar, especially, especially rooftop solar, but solar across the board. That I think, unless we really get into a bad place, recessions or things like that, I think the government will continue to be supportive of these kind of technologies.
What potential is there for rooftop solar from this 0.03 to 2%?
Yeah, rooftop is probably the most interesting. From a utility perspective, it's still a very small player, but it's a very small, loud player. It's people investing their own money, putting it on their homes, very proud of it, being kind of independent of not needing the utility as much, and so it's a very vocal component of our mix. But for example, we have 400 megawatts of utility scale solar that will be going up, that will be cleaning the air and taking cars off the equivalent cars off the road. And we got about 17 megawatts of rooftop solar, which has been a hockey stick growth over the last 5 years. So it's just, from an impact standpoint, it's not been there, but there are some interesting models, especially out in California and Hawaii, where there's leasing models where there's almost no upfront cost to the customer, and because of the incentives coming from states, the actual bill to the customer is lower than what they paid to the utility. So. And that's really caught on in those places, and they've seen quite a bit of rooftop solar. So if we see those kind of policies and business models here in Texas, it could become a much larger piece of the pie. But to date, it's been somewhat small. But we're trying to figure that out. It's something that as a utility, we're trying to figure out what's the right way to scale up rooftop solar in our community.
So I've heard numbers of, say, 5 cents a kilowatt hour for utility scale solar, and some people will discuss that being a grid parity already. But even if it's not, even if it's just a little bit higher than natural gas, can you tell us how much you value the stability of that price as a price hedge from the variability of natural gas? Because even if it's at $4 per MMBtu now, what's your bet as far as the future price of gas and what you do? So how do you value, how many cents per kilowatt hour do you value that fixed price once you make the investment?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's hard to quantify exactly how much value you put to that. I think the way we've approached it is we think that it should be at least 20% of our, we're ascribing the value as we want to have that slice of the pie as a hedge to the rest of our portfolio. And that's the way we've approached it. Whether it's 5 cents, 6 cents, the ERCOT market trades at the wholesale level around 4 cents. So solar is getting very close to that. One of the challenges with solar is without energy storage, you may get that sort of economical price, but when the market needs it and there's clouds or whatever, or it's at night, you have to have the rest of that infrastructure to support, to basically provide that power. And so it's a little bit of a challenge to say, okay, we can, since solar is now 4 or 5 cents, we can just add as much solar as we want, or as we can, because ultimately, if you can't retire a power plant, you have to keep it standing by idle to basically power the grid when that solar farm's not producing. You don't get as much value out of that 4 to 5 cents as if it were more base load or more intermediate load. Okay. So this is a picture of one of our solar farms. Again, for example, this one is 453 acres, so 300 football fields, 75 ALAMO domes, if you guys know the ALAMO dome metric, 160,000 solar panels, and this powers about 6,600 homes, eliminates about 52,000 tons of CO2, and takes the equivalent of 9,500 cars off the road. And so, a pretty sizable array. These are also two-way tracking, dual-axis tracking, so they track the sun during the day. So as it rises, it tracks it all the way to as it sets, as well as it tracks it seasonally on it. And so you can see both two-way tracking on that technology. And again, our intent is, all of these components will be built in San Antonio. This first one wasn't, but as the future ones go, all these components were built in San Antonio. The other thing, and this was an article that actually made the New York Times. Our energy strategy, our diversification, stuff. It plays out to some degree. But what that made the New York Times is the developer OCI Solar, basically, not in this farm, but in one of the other farms, basically uses sheep to maintain keep the grass from growing high. So it's interesting how solar especially really touches beyond just pure economics of the facility itself.
160,000 panels for 6,600 homes worth out about 25 panels per house. Mm-hmm. If you compare that against the number of panels required for a rooftop, do you still feel the economies of scale here make this a better option than rooftop solar?
Well, I think what the calculation here is the 25 panels would be required to fulfill all of the power needs of the house, not just during the peak hours, but all of throughout the day, the night, throughout the year. The efficiency of the panels are the same whether they're here or on your rooftop. So you're not getting any efficiency gains. What you do is you get gains in terms of costs, cheaper land prices. Well, actually, on the rooftop, you have free land, free site there. But you do have some economies of scale in terms of volume of components here.
Yeah, it seems like the rooftop it never pays to have single axis or dual axis. So, is scale economies, or what do you attribute the ability to have it pay sufficiently to have dual axis? Weber goes not single.
Yeah. The biggest thing is our peak actually happens at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and so if you have a fixed solar system, it'll peak wherever it's oriented to the sun. So if it's kind of straight, it'll peak at noon, around lunchtime, and then it falls off, and at 4 or 5 o'clock you have very little solar production. So again, you get a lot of power, and again, this is one of the challenges with solar and renewables in general. You get a lot of power. But then there are times, and in the case of solar, at 6 o'clock where you have very little power. And so you need all of the power plants that we have and all the infrastructure we've got to support that time frame. Now, one of the things with a tracking system, especially single axis, and to some extent dual axis, is you can now get more of that power in the later evening components. So with dual axis, we actually see, and I don't have the exact numbers, but we see actually, still 50, 60% production at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock when we still need it.
Cris, are you looking into any options outside your regional area, like going out into West Texas, to one, get the further west sun, better match your load, and perhaps lower land costs and the Cris lines there, perhaps?
Yeah, definitely, and part of the 400 megawatt deal gives them some latitude to go to West Texas, where you, like you said, you've got cheaper land and also more solar radiance than you might have in San Antonio. But what we also found is again, solar goes beyond just the economics. There's a pride of solar, and if it's part of the fabric of the community, whether it's rooftop or it's a solar farm right next to a school or right next to a highway, you don't get that in West Texas. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And so we think it's important to have solar be part of our distribution system, not just in some remote place. I think this is about 40 megawatts. Yeah. Yes, about 200 watt probably panel. That's about right.
On the last slide, I guess there's the 2020 goal and then the 65% low carbon. How do you define low carbon? What
Yeah,
is
good.
your mix?
Good question. So low carbon really is for us, obviously renewables, energy efficiency, nuclear, and natural gas. We define natural gas as low carbon.
I mean, just as far as natural gas from a life cycle perspective, there's methane as well, and that it's, I guess, 20 to 30 times is that taken into account as far as low carbon?
We just count the CO2 component, and really until energy storage comes to play, natural gas is going to be the bridge technology, unless we want to have reliability challenges. So I think that's part of it. We are talking with a company which is looking at some gasification of coal, where they actually recapture the carbon and use it for enhanced oil field recovery, and so that is another potential opportunity to reduce our carbon.
Along the lines of the cost of energy, 100% goal, and your comments on reliability, how much of the sort of grid reliability, if there were a lot of renewables, is your responsibility versus we can sort of offload that onto ERCOT and everybody that has to sort of provide those services or can bid for those services on the grid overall?
Yeah, I mean, right now I think the policies coming from ERCOT are very supportive of renewables. So they have something called ancillary services, where power plants have to have non-spin reserves, frequency ups, down, voltage regulation. So we have to reserve a certain amount of our capacity that goes beyond serving our load for these kind of things to keep ERCOT reliable. And a lot of the renewables, solar and wind, don't have that same obligation. Now, there's discussion about potentially changing that, but right now, a lot of the reliability challenges with renewables are being picked up by the traditional power plants with the current ERCOT policies.
I guess my question is, how much is that your responsibility versus ERCOT's responsibility to make sure that those services are being provided?
Well, so
you got 100% renewable. Do people on ERCOT's grid pick up the ancillary services, or do you have to?
So right now, with the way ERCOT policies are, it's ERCOT's. ERCOT would have to take on those things. Now, I'm sure they're starting to address these things, but right now, that would be the case.
This would have touched on wind as well, but how much planning permission do you have to go through to build something like that, and how much pushback are you getting from people saying that this is actually quite ugly and sort of destroying the countryside around?
Yeah. We haven't got the latter part. I think a lot of people are very excited about it. There's a lot of land in Texas, and people are looking at ways. I mean, people are leasing out their mineral rights to oil field companies to come in and drill and frack and do all sorts of things. So we're not getting any kind of pushback. And again, this is Texas for putting solar farms or solar panels on kind of land that's out there. We try to, and not only try, but it really is our intent to do it in land that is does not have trees, so we don't have to be cutting down trees, because that is people do get upset about that, and we don't feel like that's the right thing to do. So we do take those things into consideration, but no, everything's been very positive in terms of putting these things up. Other parts of the country, there have been some issues on the wind side, that the wind turbines are aesthetically not pleasing, but yeah, it's been more pockets versus a broad-based pushback on these type of technologies. And then your first part of your question, which is how long does it take to stand these things up? One of the attractive things about renewables and solar farms, they're very quick to stand up. I mean, these solar farms, this solar farm was built in literally 6 months. So whereas a traditional power plant will take, for a gas plant, 3 years. For a coal plant, again, you couldn't even permit a coal plant these days, but probably 5 years. A nuclear plant, probably 7 to 10 years. So you're talking 6 months here. So.
How much does this help mitigate water this situation?
Yeah, that's another big attractive opportunity for renewables, especially PV solar. There's virtually no water use. In fact, there's some question of whether we'd have to wash the panels as they dusted up, and it doesn't rain much, so we'd have to put a watering infrastructure or run a water truck. But we've seen the performance stay pretty consistent without having to do much or any washing of the panels. So there's virtually no water use. The vendor, or I don't remember. I think in this one was Keiko. And I think we've also used SMA. Is another one. Yeah. If you go to our website, you can see our new energy economy partners. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, a big game changer that has happened here recently, and we feel good about it because we've tried to anticipate this this low carbon strategy several years back. But the EPA has recently come up with a proposed rule where they are regulating carbon for existing plants. So they've had a rule out over the past several years where it's new plants. If you want to build a new plant, whether it's a gas plant or a coal plant, you have to have a greenhouse gas permit. And there's a proposed limit of, I think, around 1,000 tons per megawatt hour, which is roughly about the threshold between a combined cycle gas plant and a coal plant. So it really took coal off the table. But that was for new plants. And so, that has its set of challenges. The bigger deal with this rule that was issued here in June was this was existing plants. So existing plants, communities, utilities have already made that investment. There really is no technology to capture carbon or remove carbon from a fossil fuel plant. I mean, there's some interesting technologies in the lab and in academics being piloted out there. The DOE's funding some of these, but in terms of commercially viable that you can just apply to all of our plants, it really is not there. And I personally think it's going to be a ways to get there. So what that means is you either have to shut down plants, or you have to think about adding, renewables and energy efficiency into your mix to basically, create a smaller footprint of the plants that you have. And so the EPA has proposed this rule where they are looking for a 30% reduction by 2030 in terms of greenhouse gases from existing plants, and that's the big thing, the existing plants, from where they were in 2005. They've recently updated that to have 2012 be the baseline year for that reduction. And so that plays well for nuclear, for obviously renewables, solar, wind, energy efficiency, and any kind of efficiency gains you can do, and also natural gas, because natural gas is basically the alternative technology. If you have to shut down a plant today and you don't have energy storage along with renewables, natural gas will be that bridge technology. They have a pretty aggressive timeline. They are looking for comments by October 16th of this year, and are looking for a final rule in 2015. And then basically the state, and what the EPA has done is they've set targets. basically set forth various strategies that you can do to achieve those targets, but it really is up to the state to develop their own plans to basically reach these targets. And the states would have 2 to 3 years to basically get their they're called SIP plans, state implementation plans, together for this. Now, this will probably be challenged. It'll probably take a longer time to play out. But what's interesting is the courts have upheld the EPA regulation on the new plants, regulation for new plants. So I don't anticipate things to be different here for existing plants. Any questions on that? So again, I think from our standpoint with this rule, we want to make sure we get credit for the things that we have done, and we want to make sure we get some flexibility to comply with this path. But we are not legally going to challenge the EPA as other folks might. So we're going to basically focus our attention on how do we work with this rule, how do we get to where we need to get, again, getting credit for what we've done and flexibility to get there over time. And again, the way we're going to get there is early retirement of DLE and purchase of the 800 megawatt Rio de Galles plant, the 400 megawatts of solar, our nuclear commitments, and our demand response and energy efficiency programs. So with all that, if you look at kind of our generation mix from 1980 through 2020, you can see our generation's gone up as described by the left-hand column. So we were roughly about 7 million megawatt hours in 1980. We expect to be around 35 million megawatt hours in 2020. But our carbon footprint is following this downward trajectory, and we again hope to be, within the EPA limits and regulations by 2020. Again, if we get full credit for our actions. Any questions on that?
What caused that sharp increase
That was probably nuclear coming on board. So STP 1 and 2 were basically coming on board. I think it had a set of issues or challenges, and that's why it spiked up. But then when it came back online, it came back down. So that was really a result of nuclear coming into our portfolio.
Is the EPA ruling more bulletproof and survive the next administration, or can it be easily overturned in January 2017?
Yeah,
is the ploy going to be challenge it, try to wait out this administration, have somebody else get in and overturn it quickly?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think our view is that really it's going to be hard to challenge it. I mean, really what Congress would have to do is to basically defund the EPA, to take away funding from it. But it's really up to the courts to determine whether these laws are constitutionally viable or not.
So this isn't just administrative action, so it's really going to have to be a legal change or
Yeah.
a law change in Congress, not just a change of administration to change the trajectory of it?
Yeah, I think it's hard to, and if the folks that probably could answer that question a lot better than I can, but you look at even during the Bush administration, the Clean Air Act, CASPR, which is the Cross-State Air Pollution Act, was put forth, and so the EPA seems to have a momentum of its own that seems to be kind of independent of what party is in control, what we've seen. Yes.
Chris, do you have any lignite still in the mix?
No. We burn Powder River Basin out of Wyoming, Montana. That's the other interesting thing that will happen here in Texas is with EFH, which is Energy Future Holdings, which is the old TXU. They're in the process of going through a bankruptcy, and Luminant is the big generator there, and they have a lot of coal in their mix, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, whether they'll fight or those get shut down or repowered with other fuel sources. So just to maybe close it up, our strategy has been one of diversification and rebalancing our portfolio. So again, getting back to that original question, how do we model this? We've done quite a bit of modeling, but a lot of it has been pretty straightforward. We want to go from 80% to something that's a little bit more balanced. And really, a lot of the emphasis of the modeling was, what are the cost implications of doing that? What's the right strategy? What's the emission profiles and things like that? So that has been a big piece of our strategy. We're also looking to engage our customers with innovative solutions that add value and reduce their monthly bills. So we're seeing quite a bit of activity on the customer side, whether it's home management systems, where customers can basically control their energy use through their iPhone, and we also have the ability in partnership with that. So in our case, we'll basically invest in that technology for the customer, but they allow us to run some conservation events. So we have the ability to modulate lots of individual appliances, air conditioning systems, and basically create a virtual power plant and not have to build a real power plant for that. And then finally, we want to make a difference. One of the things that we've done, especially under Doyle Beneby's leadership, is really taking on economic development. So we want to have an impact there, and so when we look at some of these big deals, we want to understand what they're going to do in terms of investing in our community and being partners and not, flying in on a plane and doing the work and then flying out. And so that's a big piece of this, and really we've got probably $1 billion of economic development impact if all of our deals play through. Then finally, we want to do this while keeping rates affordable and achieving operational excellence at our power plants and at our grid, the grid side of the business and the retail side of our business.
What portion of your customer base is homes and what portion is industries?
Yeah, San Antonio is very much a residential community. There's not a lot of industry per se. So a majority of it is a residential community. We do have military bases, so those are probably probably what you guys would think about more commercial industrial load systems.
I have a question on the fuel diversification. I see the good down to their portfolio in 2025 with high coal and adding a gas. And I think all the utilities are going that direction.
Right.
So I guess that beyond the 2020 time frame, the wholesale market is dominated by gas capacity due to the low gas prices for energy vehicles. So we are, the capacity is relying too much on the gas side, so losing diversification. Contradicting to your strategy. So do you see any kind of need to modify the wholesale market rule to benefit diversification?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. One of the things about ERCOT, and I personally like it, is it is truly a market-based system. So it's supply demand that dictates price. It's energy only. There's not a capacity market, and so you really are getting the true value of power at that moment. One of the challenges is it's hard to kind of instantaneously bring a power plant online if you have a lot of high prices. But having said that, it really does value the most efficient resource to supply load to customers. I think you're right. I mean, we're not going to be adding any more coal. Nuclear seems like it's got its challenges. So it's really gas and renewables. So I do think that it won't be gas only. I think renewables are going to play much stronger into this mix. And I think we have still a long ways to go with renewables in Texas before we have to deal with energy storage, because we have demand response, you have energy efficiency, which basically can offset. So when solar is not producing, you can call demand response and basically rebalance the load, the supply-demand picture in more of a real-time basis. So I think we have some more room to play with renewables and have that be a much bigger portion. I don't know if we'll get to the Austin 100% mark, but I think renewables definitely has a much bigger play in Texas and ERCOT. But I do like the market structure in terms of being very efficient and basically paying for whatever resource is required at that moment. And just to close it off, so 5 years, 10 years is a long, long time, and so even though we do have some room to grow and add some natural gas as a bridge, I think the 2020s will look completely different. I mean, it's who knows? Is it going to be a lot more rooftop out there, solar? Is it going to be fuel cells where you're running off natural gas? I mean, there's just so many exciting technologies out there that it's almost trying to predict what the internet looked like in the 1980s. There's no way. I'm not as concerned with we're just going to have a bunch of natural gas in the 2020s. I don't think that's going to play out like that.
We talked about storage several times in modeling. Does CPS factor that into the plans, or is it a big thing that's coming up, or is that kind of too far up?
Yeah, no, we definitely are looking at energy storage quite a bit. We've done some modeling as to how much storage capacity could we have in our system. We think there's roughly a gigawatt of storage capacity that is applicable to our territory. We've got some pilots that we're looking at that will probably stand up here, here in the next year or so. But it's still going to be more at the pilot stage versus kind of a broad deployment of energy storage, and it will also be more on the utility scale side. So it'll be 2-3 megawatt battery sitting next to a solar, centralized solar farm versus home storage systems that be going out there. So we think it's going to be utility scale first and then move more towards the home over time.
How generalizable do you think CPS is used to other municipalities and other islands?
Yeah, I think we could be. I think we are a good microcosm of how you can do this, taking a longer term view. We have some of the lowest rates in the state and the country. We're at roughly about 10 cents a kilowatt hour. We're not looking to have a lot of rate increases in the future, and so we're doing a lot of this while we're keeping rates affordable and having a low carbon generation mix, and we do think it's replicable. So we think others could follow it. Yeah, I don't think it's. I mean, obviously, every region, every community is going to be different. I think we're very blessed in Texas to have a lot of natural resources in terms of wind, solar. Where the southeast, you don't have as much of those capabilities. So regions will be different in terms of resource availability. But in Texas, I think there's definitely opportunity to replicate what we've got.
But Texas bears the biggest burden caused by the EPA rule.
Texas what?
Has the most to do to reduce the carbon footprint because of the EPA rule. Yeah. I mean, Texas has a lot to figure. That will be a challenge in terms of complying with the EPA rule. Outside of municipally owned utilities like Austin and San Antonio that have been a little bit more proactive on some of these issues. But it'll be harder for others to kind of do this in a cost-neutral way. But I think renewable prices have come down quite a bit. Solar prices that we were paying 4 or 5 years ago are nowhere where they're much lower these days. And so I think in some ways it could be easier for others to get into this space, even though they're a little bit later to the game. What do you think of a smart grid to increase energy efficiency using two-way communication?
Mm-hmm.
Control the generation power quantity, considering acres?
Yeah. Yes, I think what we've seen a lot of innovation on the generation side with solar panels and the wind turbines. We think a lot of that is going to continue to play, but really where we think the new innovation is going to come is on the grid side. and that includes our side of the meter, which is the distribution system, and it's going to be the customer side of the meter, which will be how their home is wired and how they basically manage and run power for the various appliances. So we think there's a lot of opportunity there. It's smart grid, I think, is a platform for doing some of those things, but I think a lot of innovation still to come on the grid side and the home side of the equation. So we're standing up that capability from a technology development within CPS to focus a lot more resources and money in that direction.
You mentioned that the rooftop solar uptake was higher than anticipated, and it consumed the budget allocation sooner than anticipated. So I was wondering, why is there difficulty in increasing that budget at a lower dollar per watt rebate? It seems like it appears that might have been a good investment in terms of the revenue requirement to deploy capacity. And so I was just wondering what's wrong with that model. What's the right dollar per watt payment in terms of some capacity value to address the
Right.
growth?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the direction that we need to go, and we've gone to some extent, which is every year we ratchet that rebate dollar per watt down. So right now we're paying $1.60 a watt, which is still pretty high. We've tried to take on some of the rate tariff issues, and that's one of the reasons we've kept the rebate pretty substantial. So we've talked to everything on from value of solar, where we're basically trying to value the solar that's deployed on the rooftop to various grid fees for basically accessing and using the grid as a backup to the solar system, and the rebate was really there to basically support some of these new rate structures. But we really haven't made a lot of traction on the new rate structure. So I think thinking about where the rebate has to be to continue to support solar, but make it cost effective and reflective of where solar prices have come is definitely part of our strategy.
Let's take one more question, and I've seen that hand for a few minutes.
Given the exploding international demand for natural gas, as well as sort of the more recent public pushback from extraction because of extraction processes, I guess we can probably agree that it's unreasonable to expect that rates will be as low as they are for too much into the future. I was just wondering, if there is not a huge push for investment in renewables, what's to keep sort of just a back and forth between coal and gas from being predominant sources of energy? Is there a long-term, say, backup plan for natural gas, or is it just being used as a sort of fortuitous boom that can be relied on?
Yeah, so that's a good question. That'll probably take 30 minutes to answer. Well, first of all, EPA is taking coal off the table, so I don't think there's going to be. Obviously, the rule will be challenged, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But really, coal is to some extent off the table. So really, it's natural gas, and part of the challenge with natural gas is it's so cheap, and one of the reasons it's so cheap is a lot of these guys are going after oil. So it's the natural gas is just a byproduct. So they're drilling for oil, which is selling $100 a barrel, and they're just getting the natural gas for free. So, or they're producing it for free. And so, even though we've had the polar vortex, I don't know if you guys have heard of the polar vortex in February, and we've had record kind of gas usage, natural gas prices have been very, very, and pre-shale gas prices would be going through the roof. So, with shale and the push for oil for transportation, and the market for oil, it is, as a consequence, making natural gas very plentiful and cheap. And so if you have a resource that's plentiful or cheap, no matter, obviously all the other associated issues with it, it's, the market will find some way of using it. And so until that changes, until we wean ourselves off of oil, natural gas is going to continue to be a cheap byproduct of that process.
We have reached the end of our hour. Let's thank Cris again.
What's that?
We really made it very important.
Yeah, no, good. Lots of good questions. Got a smart group.
to have some more interaction. And then there's a group waiting for you in Tom, who's the director of the Energy Institute.
Okay.